Hope everyone's well. Review today, a 3,000 mile review of the Triumph 400X Scrambler that has just arrived back from Iceland. If you've followed the videos that I did whilst I was out there, I was guiding a group of 13 other riders and the support van on a 2-week tour of Iceland on bikes that we shipped in from Immingham on the east coast of England out to Reykjavik and then shipped back at the end of the trip. The reason for shipping bikes in is that renting a bike out there is very expensive, and you can only seem to rent the big bikes, the 1200s and things like that. And from past experience of taking a GS 1200 round Iceland, it's just too big a bike. You know, even with technique, talent and confidence, if you're out there solo especially, the bigger bikes are just too big for exploring, to getting off the beaten track. So I pitched this at 650cc bikes or less. So of the 13 bikes, I think we had 3 or 4 CRF 300s, 3 Vos 300s, 2 GS 310s, a 701 Husqvarna and a 790 KTM Adventure, which were the 2 bigger bikes. But in the main, there were smaller bikes, Himalayan and a Scram, and then this. This was probably of the fleet of bikes that I've run for people to ride down here. This was the last one I'd choose to take, to be honest. And it was only at the final hour that I thought, you know what, I'm still really curious about that Triumph. And I was curious when it came out. Triumph sort of just said, well, here's a bike, here's a street scrambler. They didn't make a big fuss about it and not a lot of fanfare. And I just thought, you know what, I'm intrigued by that. And then the price was good, and you know, it came out and I sort of wrote it off as being mainly just a 2-hour street bike to potter around in on a Sunday. But it left me curious. It left me with answers as to how it would perform on a bigger trip when it's under duress and being tested in quite a confronting environment. We were doing river crossings and a lot of dirt road riding, longer distances, and obviously riding it against its peers. How would it perform against those kind of bikes? So I was very curious, and which is why I sent it. Before it went out there, I sent it up to John at Rally Raid, who are working on a kit for the bike. They historically have worked on smaller capacity bikes to give them more scope, more appeal as adventure travel bikes. So they start with the 500X and then the 310 GS. They've done stuff for the CRF 300 and the Tenere 700. And this is the next bike that they're working on. They give it spoked tubeless rims. So same size, 17 rear, 19-inch front, exactly the same really, just look a lot better. And I think that's probably it really. You know, they had a great deal of aesthetic appeal, which is, if that's important, then I think they're a bit of a no-brainer. About £1,200. I think they're just waiting to finalise details of them. Won't change the way the bike rides, just changes the way it looks. And obviously there's an advantage of spokes in theory, that if you hit something hard, it will deform it could deform the rim, but you'd still carry air because the tube would be intact. A tubeless, the theory is that if you damage a rim or dent a rim, it loses all its pressure. So this is like the best of both worlds, kind of, I suppose. Well, I've just contradicted myself, so ignore that. The only other thing, they put a Tractive Stage 2 rear shock in, which I think gives a little bit more suspension travel over the stock 150. They were going to do the front fork cartridges, which they have a kit for, but they didn't arrive in time. And that's just to up the suspension, well, actually retain its spec sheet 150mm travel at the front, which is actually reduced to 130 when they disassembled the suspension. They found that there were stoppers in there that actually meant that there was only 130mm of travel, not 150, which is quite low compared to, say, a Fantic Caballero Rally, which has got 200mm, or most adventure bikes, which have got around 200mm. So this was very much pitched as a street scrambler by Triumph. I don't think they designed it to have off-road credentials, and I don't think the expectation of them was that people were going to buy it to go off-road. So I like to take it out its comfort zone. I like to see how it would perform. Did about 2,200 miles on the tour, mixture of roads, as I said. And I think, you know, starting, I've got a bit of a list here. The engine. The engine in this is probably the best single-cylinder engine on the market, I would say. I was impressed with it to start with when I first got the bike. You know, I thought, yeah, it's good engine, pulls well, smooth, tractable. There was a bit of criticism of the throttle. Now it's ride-by-wire, i.e. sensors rather than a cable, that it felt a bit snatchy and things, which I think at times it does, and when you first ride it, it does feel a bit snatchy. But you soon sort of get used to that and see it as no longer an issue. But what's great about it is just the strength of the engine in the mid-range, which is where I think you need it when you're traveling. You know, you're not doing high-speed stuff, you're not revving the head off it, you're just riding a nice, relaxing ride, and that's where this is at its best. It's smooth, it's tractable, it picks up cleanly in any gear, pretty much at any speed. It'll pull 25 miles an hour in 6th gear and wind out all the way to 95 in 6th gear. So I love the gearing because it means you can be in any gear at any time, which means you can ride quite lazily, or for want of a better word, you can be focusing on the scenery and other things, and the engine can just be doing its thing almost in the background. So it's a very it's an engine with with two personalities really. When you want it to go fast, it digs hard and it pushes hard, and it's got a very strong mid-range. Not so much of a strong top end, but low down and mid is very strong. So it's fast when you want it to be, but it's very quiet and refined when you're just wanting to potter. And I think that's a great attribute for a travel engine. Compared to the Himalayan 450 engine, the new one, I find that quite gruff, I find it quite rattly, quite agricultural, and it never wants to sit in a gear for long. It's always wanting to be up a gear, down a gear. The sweet spot is very small on that. And I think that's what frustrated me a bit when I took it around Ireland, that bike. It never settles in a gear, whereas this can be in any gear, and that makes for a really relaxing ride. 75 miles per gallon, 200-mile range on the tank, which was perfectly adequate for Iceland and was better than the other bikes on the tour. So the strongest point of this bike is the engine. It's a fantastic engine. I loved riding it. I loved opening it up. I loved squirting the bike out the corners and on the trails. It was tractable and it would chug and it would go through rivers nicely and it would pick up cleanly. So the engine is its greatest strength. And actually it reveals how important the engine is in capturing your interest in a bike. It needs to be a strong engine. If it's not a strong engine, it puts a lot of emphasis on the other components, which if they're not spectacular, can really sort of let the bike fall down. So it's a great engine. The chassis as standard was okay. I found on the back roads of Devon, it got out of shape. It didn't have the composure at the rear, so it wanted to stand up in the corners. And so once you gathered pace, it just got out of shape. It was one of those bikes where you thought, oh, this could be a great bike with better suspension. And that's effectively what Rally Raid are doing with the rear shock and the fork internals. The rear shock really enhances the way that the bike flows on the tarmac. It gives it better composure and more stability and allows you to ride harder and faster. And even as a novice rider, it gives you more confidence. So putting a rear shock on this, whether it's attractive or whatever else comes out, is a no-brainer if you want to improve the feel and ride quality of the bike. It will improve the speed of the bike far better than any engine enhancements, because it'll allow you to make use of the engine that this bike's got, because you'll have a chassis that can use that power. And I think the shock really unlocks the potential of the bike. My criticism of this on the Iceland trip was that there's not enough front suspension travel. So over the shallow potholes and things, it was really firm. Really impacted through the arms, and if you were sat down and you didn't expect it, it would really kick you through the chassis, through the saddle. So I think the limitations of this bike with a 19-inch front, 17-inch rear and short travel suspension is that it's just not as refined and built to deal with rough roads like the 21-inch front-wheeled Vosges and CRFs, which is completely understandable. But it would be nice to try it with a bit more long travel suspension to see how it would cope. For example, a KTM 390 with the WP Apex suspension would have handled it a lot better, as would Fantic Caballero Rally 500, which has also got some really great stock suspension with 200mm of travel. So this bike, I think, is a bike in waiting for the suspension that it deserves to make it a true scrambler dirt bike, because everything else about it is really good. The standing position is good, you get good control on the bars and on the levers, nice and narrow there, the foot pegs are good. What I also like about the bike is the traction control and ABS are really easy to disable. Just one button, hold it down, let it go. When you kill the ignition, when you want parking up or flick the side stand down, those features, ABS and traction control, stay off. They stay off until you turn the ignition, which is a really user-friendly and manageable way of working it, and quite a sensible way of doing it. All the manufacturers, KTM, you know, if you kill the ignition, the traction control ABS kicks back in and then you have to disable it again. Triumph, I think, have been sensible with this bike in realising that, you know, if you've turned traction control off, then you're sensible enough to carry on riding the bike without having to keep turning it off. So I think that's a good setup. So everything about the bike really in that case is just really good as a dirt scrambler, bar the suspension travel. The rear shock has helped it benefit greatly, but it definitely needs more suspension at the front just to complete the bike. In terms of problems, I'll just see what else I've got. Problems with the bike have been quite numerous really, and I guess that's my only reservation with this bike. It's not being completely faultless, just going through it. The engine management light's been on for the last few days and is still on now. It doesn't affect the way it runs, but the light is on. The immobiliser light coming on is a common fault on the forum, and that's been on a bit. The front brake disc has warped quite badly, so that's going to need a new front brake disc. The brake pads wore out at 700 miles on the front, not through heavy use, just through bad brake pad quality and the very expensive OEM from the dealer, even though they don't even have them in stock. The chain wore out, or was starting to show wear at the rear sprocket after about 800 miles again, so this had a new X-ring chain on it. So I think there are elements of the bike that aren't probably as durable as you would like them to be, but we've got to accept that Triumph built this down to a price. And I think for £5,700-800, although I think it's gone up a little bit, I think they've built a fantastic bike. You know, it was out of its depth. It wasn't a natural bike to take to Iceland. It probably wasn't the right bike to take. There were better bikes for it. If you're going to buy a bike straight out of the crate to do Iceland, you'd be better with a Vosges or a CRF or a Himalayan or any of those bikes. But for a bike that was way out of its comfort zone, doing something that it wasn't really designed to do, it really excited me as a bike. It made me happy as a bike to ride it. It looks great. I think the wheels, purely for a vanity point of view, are worth getting because they just transform the bike into a really exclusive looking bike, like a more premium bike. My argument with the wheels would be to buy a second-hand Scrambler. There's a few coming up second-hand. Chuck the wheels on because that'd be the difference in a brand new to a second-hand. If you want to make the bike ride better, put the suspension on. But all in all, Triumph, you know, to say I wrote this bike off, to say I thought it was just a Sunday afternoon toy bike for people who didn't do a lot of miles, it's actually got better. It's got far more meat on the bone than that. You could tour Europe on it because it's comfortable all day. I never had any issue with the saddle. The screen buffeting, actually, well, there is no screen, but the airflow is really good, so you can sit at 70 miles an hour, no problems. The engine is smooth, so it's not going to tire you in that regard. The fuel economy is good and the range is good. So as a travel bike around Europe, I think it's going to be great. So anybody who's got one who's thinking, oh, I want to go to Spain, do I need a bigger bike or take a bigger bike? No, just stay off the motorways probably, or do a minimum amount of motorways. You've actually got a really good touring bike. Luggage-wise, I put the Rhino Walk luggage on, 120 quid off Amazon, no problem there. Tank bag and a dry bag along the top. I'll show you this Rally Raid rear rack that I've had fitted as well. And you're ready to go. So I don't know whether Triumph deliberately underplayed this bike. They don't seem to have pushed it as hard, even though it's selling really well. I think it's selling really well on its price and in the way it looks. But actually, it's a bike which could flower into far more. I think it's got great potential. You know what? It's because it doesn't try to be anything that it's not. It just is what it just is what it is, which is a very capable, enjoyable bike that needs to be fine-tuned a little bit, needs a bit more durability in it. But yeah, I think it performed really well in Iceland. I was very impressed with it. I enjoyed it. It became the bike that would be the depth gauge for the river crossings. I never felt it was going to let me down in that regard. It was a bike that I trusted on the trip. And if you trust a bike and you enjoy a bike, that's it really, isn't it? That's all you could ever want for it. So I'm going to give it a clean up, see how it scrubs up. But I don't see any deterioration. There's a few knocks on that left guard somehow. I think there's a bit of stone chipping come through. But other than that, good to go. So Triumph 400X, 3,000 mile review. What can I say? I think it's a great bike. It can be made better from suspension mainly, but it's a great bike that Triumph has given us actually. And I'm not a Triumph man. I've never really admired anything that they've done because I thought it was all brand over bike. You know, the image rather than the substance. But in this case, I think it's substance over bike, you know, substance over image. The substance is just a strong foundation. And that engine, if that engine is going to be, and I believe it to be, bore and stroke the same as the new 390 KTM engine, this new Enduro version, if that engine is the centre point of that new KTM, that bike's going to be a fantastic machine because it's a great engine. It's probably one of the best small capacity single cylinder engines I've ever ridden by a mile, actually. And if this engine was in that Himalayan, that bike could be twice as good, I think. So yeah, happy days, cheers.